On the happiest day of my life, standing at the altar in a custom silk gown, my estranged sister shoved a heavy silver-wrapped box into my hands. My husband, an active-duty Navy SEAL commander, clamped his hand over my wrist before my fingers could even graze the ribbon. His eyes were completely devoid of warmth as he stared her down and whispered a command that chilled my blood. "Do not touch it." He pulled me behind him, his voice echoing through the silent cathedral. "You just brought a threat into my home." In perfect unison, his 4 groomsmen stood up, blocking the exits. My sister's arrogant smirk dissolved into sheer terror. I am Rebecca, 33 years old, and a cybersecurity consultant with my own data protection firm in Washington, D.C. Before I share exactly what federal crimes my family brought to my wedding, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to sever ties with toxic blood relatives to protect your own peace. The heavy oak doors of the historic venue had burst open right as the string quartet began to play. I stood at the altar next to Declan, holding his hands, surrounded by our closest friends, high-ranking military officials, and executives from the tech sector. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows cast a peaceful glow over the room. That peace was violently shattered the moment Harrison and Brenda, my biological parents, marched down the center aisle. Flanking them was my younger sister Brittany, wearing an inappropriate off-white cocktail dress, clearly chosen to draw attention away from the bride. Trailing slightly behind her was her husband Andre, a meticulous and honest financial auditor who looked completely bewildered by the sudden intrusion. They were not invited. I had cut contact with them years ago, tired of being the family scapegoat, while Brittany was treated like royalty. They did not know I had built a multi-million-dollar company. They did not know my husband held a top-secret security clearance. They walked into a room full of federal agents and military brass thinking they were crashing a cheap, pathetic gathering to assert their dominance one last time. Harrison loudly complained about the security checks at the front door, his voice carrying over the music. Brenda strutted down the aisle with her nose in the air, looking at my guests with undisguised contempt. But it was Brittany who took the lead, marching straight up the altar steps, completely ignoring the stunned silence of the 200 people watching her. She was carrying a box wrapped in thick metallic silver paper. It looked surprisingly heavy for its size. "Well, do not look so shocked," Brittany said, a nasty smirk playing on her lips. "We are family. You really thought we would let you get married without bringing a gift?" She thrust the box toward my chest. Instinctively, I raised my hands to take it. But Declan moved faster than my eyes could track. His hand snapped out, gripping my wrist with absolute unyielding force. He did not look at me. His intensely focused gaze was locked entirely on the silver box. In the total silence of the room, my trained ears caught it. A faint, rhythmic electronic hum coming from inside the wrapping. Declan stepped smoothly in front of me, placing his body between the box and my own. "Do not touch it," he commanded, his tone dropping into the authoritative, icy register of a military commander assessing a combat zone. He leveled a glare at my sister that made her physically recoil. "You just brought a threat into my home." Harrison puffed out his chest, his face turning an angry shade of red. "Now listen here, young man," he shouted, pointing a finger at Declan. "That is her sister. She brought a wedding gift. How dare you treat your own family like a pack of criminals? You are ruining a beautiful day with your paranoid delusions." Brenda immediately chimed in, stepping up to the altar and placing a dramatic hand over her heart. "This is exactly why we had to come," she wailed, playing the victim perfectly for the audience she assumed would side with her. "Our poor daughter is marrying a controlling, aggressive man. We just wanted to drop off a present and show our love." Declan ignored their theatrics entirely. He gave a sharp, subtle nod to the front row. The reaction was instantaneous. 4 of his groomsmen, all active-duty SEALs who moved with lethal precision, stood up. Chairs scraped against the marble floor. Without a single word spoken, they formed a tight, impenetrable perimeter around the altar. 2 men blocked the main aisle, while the other 2 secured the side exits. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The guests, many of whom recognized tactical threat responses, remained perfectly still. Brittany's smug confidence vanished. She stood frozen, holding the silver box, her hands suddenly trembling as she looked at the towering men surrounding her. Andre, standing a few feet away, narrowed his eyes, his analytical mind clearly realizing that his wife had dragged him into something incredibly dangerous. "Put the box down on the floor gently and step back," Declan ordered. Brittany swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward our parents for rescue. "Do as he says," I added, my voice tight. As a cybersecurity expert, my mind was racing through the possibilities of what that electronic hum could be. She slowly lowered the box to the marble floor and scrambled backward, nearly tripping over the hem of her inappropriate dress. Declan signaled to his best man, Liam, an explosive ordnance disposal specialist, whose day job involved disarming highly volatile devices in hostile environments. Liam stepped calmly past the perimeter, kneeling beside the silver box. Harrison scoffed loudly, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "This is absolute madness," he sneered. "It is a gravy boat and a set of custom kitchen knives. You military types watch too many movies." Liam did not rip the paper. He retrieved a small ceramic blade from his suit pocket and made a precise surgical incision along the wrapping. He peeled the silver paper back, revealing a nondescript black plastic casing. He popped the latches and opened the lid. There was no gravy boat. There were no kitchen knives. Liam looked up at Declan, his expression completely serious. "Active transmission," he reported loud enough for me to hear. "We have a live burner phone tethered to a secondary power supply. It is transmitting a cellular signal. Taped next to it is a military-grade micro-GPS tracker currently pinging our exact location. And attached to the bottom is a heavily encrypted high-capacity USB flash drive." A collective gasp echoed through the front rows. My blood ran cold. The devices sitting on the floor were not something you could buy at a local electronics store. The tracker alone was restricted hardware. As someone who ran a data security firm, I knew exactly what I was looking at. This was a sophisticated surveillance and data infiltration drop. Harrison and Brenda stopped shouting. The blustering entitlement drained from their faces, replaced by genuine panicked confusion. They stared at the electronics, then at Brittany, who looked like she was about to be sick. "You think this is a family dispute?" Declan said, his voice ringing out with terrifying clarity across the cathedral. "I am a naval special warfare commander with a top-secret security clearance. My wife handles classified digital infrastructure. You just walked into a secure location and handed us active transmitting devices and an encrypted data payload. This is not a wedding drama. This is suspected espionage." Declan looked over his shoulder at the man guarding the main doors. "Lock the venue down. Nobody leaves." Declan completely ignores the frantic screaming protests coming from my parents. Harrison is red in the face, bellowing loudly about disrespect and family rights, while Brenda wails dramatically, desperately trying to garner sympathy from the shocked wedding guests. Their performative outrage bounces harmlessly off Declan's iron composure. He does not even blink or acknowledge their pathetic noise. Instead, he shifts his weight, keeping his broad body positioned squarely between me and the heavy silver box sitting ominously on the marble floor. With a sharp, silent jerk of his chin, he signals to his best man, Liam. Liam is not just a groomsman in a tailored tuxedo. He is an active-duty explosive ordnance disposal specialist, a man whose entire military career is dedicated to analyzing, disarming, and neutralizing highly volatile threats in active combat zones. Liam steps forward immediately, his face entirely devoid of the celebratory joy from just moments ago. The atmosphere in the Grand Cathedral abruptly shifts from a joyous wedding ceremony to a tense, suffocating tactical operation. The guests, many of whom are high-ranking military brass and powerful defense contractors, fall absolutely silent. They understand the severity of the hand signals and the sudden aggressive perimeter formed by the seals. Liam kneels slowly beside the silver box, his movements precise and heavily calculated. He does not touch the ribbon or the wrapping paper directly. He pulls a specialized non-magnetic ceramic blade from the inner pocket of his suit jacket. The room is so incredibly quiet that the crisp, sharp sound of the blade slicing through the thick metallic wrapping paper echoes loudly off the vaulted ceilings. A collective, terrified gasp ripples through the front rows of the audience as Liam carefully peels back the layers of silver paper and cardboard. My sister Brittany takes a stumbling step backward, her smug arrogance entirely replaced by wide-eyed, trembling panic. She clearly expected me to cry or yell, not for my husband to treat her wedding gift like an active threat to national security. Liam pops the heavy metal latches on the nondescript black plastic casing hidden beneath the wrapping. He opens the lid smoothly, keeping his body angled to shield the blast radius, just in case the container holds a kinetic threat. It is not an explosive device. The collective breath held by the 200 guests releases in a shaky, nervous sigh, but the temporary relief is immediately shattered by the grim reality of what actually sits inside the container. Liam does not relax his rigid posture. He stares down into the box, his jaw clenching tightly. Inside the dense foam padding sits a cheap prepaid burner phone. Its screen is lit up actively, displaying an ongoing data transmission sequence. Taped securely directly next to the phone is a sleek black military-grade micro GPS tracker, its small green LED light blinking rhythmically to indicate it is actively pinging our exact geographic coordinates to an unknown external server. And nestled perfectly into a custom cutout at the bottom of the case is a heavy matte black USB flash drive, the exact kind specifically designed with hardware-level encryption to store massive amounts of highly sensitive data. I stare at the items, my blood running completely cold. As a cybersecurity consultant who regularly designs digital defense systems for federal agencies, I know exactly what I am looking at. This is not a harmless family prank or a bizarre, thoughtless wedding gift. This is a highly sophisticated, meticulously assembled digital infiltration kit. The burner phone is acting as a mobile hotspot, tethering the GPS signal and providing a remote access gateway to whatever malicious payload is hidden on that encrypted drive. My estranged parents and my sister brought active transmitting surveillance hardware into a closed room filled with top-tier defense personnel. Andre, my sister's husband, steps out from behind her, his eyes fixed on the hardware. As a strict-by-the-book financial auditor, he recognizes the sheer illegality of the items. He looks at Brittany, his face twisting into a harsh mask of absolute horror and disgust. He realizes instantly that his wife has dragged him into something incredibly dangerous and completely illegal. Brittany shrinks back, her hands shaking violently as she stares at the blinking green light of the tracker she so casually handed to me just minutes ago. Declan turns his intense gaze away from the open box and locks eyes with Harrison. The temperature in the cathedral seems to plummet rapidly. When my husband speaks, his voice carries a lethal, uncompromising authority that commands absolute obedience from everyone in the room. Bringing active transmitting devices and hidden surveillance equipment within physical proximity of a high-ranking military officer with a top-secret clearance is not a petty family dispute. It is a severe federal offense. It is suspected espionage. Harrison opens his mouth to argue, but the words die in his throat as the heavy reality of Declan's statement crushes him completely. The arrogant father who always thought he controlled every narrative suddenly realizes he is entirely powerless. Declan looks over his broad shoulder at the operative guarding the heavy oak doors at the back of the cathedral. Lock the venue down immediately. Nobody leaves this building today. The heavy iron deadbolts click into place, effectively sealing my toxic family inside the inescapable trap they foolishly built for themselves. The sharp sound of the locking doors signals the end of their delusional reign. They had always operated under the arrogant assumption that their cruel actions would never face any real scrutiny. They had relied on my silence and compliance for decades, completely oblivious to the fact that I was no longer the frightened girl they had discarded. Standing under the towering stained glass windows, bathed in the harsh light of their own impending ruin, they finally comprehend the catastrophic magnitude of their mistake. The reckoning has officially begun, and there is absolutely no escape from the relentless justice swiftly coming for them. The echoing click of the heavy deadbolt sends a sudden violent shudder straight through my mother. Brenda's hands claw at Brittany's arm, her facade shattering into panic. She yanks her golden child toward the side aisle, slipping wildly on the polished marble as she attempts a desperate escape. They do not make it more than 5 steps. A man built like a concrete wall steps smoothly into their path. Thomas, one of Declan's squad mates, crosses his arms entirely immovable. Brenda gasps, bouncing off his frame. She demands he move, shrieking about illegal imprisonment and threatening to call the police. Thomas stares down with absolute indifference, stating calmly that federal authorities are already on their way. The air grows thick, suffocating the uninvited guests, who realize their situation. Harrison stands frozen near the altar, draining of all color, as he watches his wife and favorite daughter trapped. The murmurs from the seated guests cease entirely. My colleagues, defense contractors, and intelligence analysts watch the scene unfold with cold calculation. Bringing surveillance equipment into a room packed with people holding security clearances is baffling. Nobody leaves the venue today. The physical space is now entirely secured from all sides. The trap my family designed to humiliate me has flawlessly reversed, locking them inside a federal nightmare of their own making. I stare at my parents cowering near the doors. The contrast between their current terror and past cruelty hits me. Seeing Brenda tremble triggers a razor-sharp memory I have tried to bury. The tension fades away, replaced by the biting cold of a November night 15 years ago. I was 18, standing on the porch of my childhood home, clutching a black garbage bag containing everything I owned. I had just discovered my bank account, filled by working double shifts for my college tuition, possessed a balance of absolute zero. Harrison and Brenda had legally remained on the joint account from when I was a minor, and they had quietly drained every single dollar. When I confronted them, terrified a bank error wiped out my future, Harrison simply tossed car keys onto the counter. He proudly announced Brittany needed transportation for her senior year, and my college fund was perfect for a luxury SUV down payment. They did not ask. They did not borrow. They stole my sweat, my late nights, and my entire future to buy a status symbol for their golden child. When I broke down begging them to explain how I would pay for university classes, their reaction lacked empathy. Brenda did not offer comfort or a solution. Instead, her face twisted into a mask of pure disgust. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging painfully into my skin, and dragged me toward the front door. She told me I was a selfish, entitled brat who refused to support her own family. She shoved me out into the freezing wind, tossing a box of trash bags onto the porch beside me. I was told I had exactly 10 minutes to pack whatever I could carry before Harrison called the police to report a trespasser. I scrambled through my room, stuffing cheap clothes and a few textbooks into the thin plastic bags, my vision blurred by tears. Brittany leaned against the doorframe of her bedroom, twirling the keys to her new SUV around her finger, an arrogant smirk plastered across her face as she watched me lose everything. She did not offer a single word of apology. She relished my destruction because my failure cemented her position as the undeniable favorite. When I stepped back out onto the porch, clutching my meager belongings, I turned back to look at my mother one last time. I was a straight-A student, a hard-working daughter who had never asked them for anything, yet I was being discarded like actual garbage. I pleaded with Brenda, asking what I had done to deserve being thrown into the street with absolutely nothing. Brenda looked down her nose at me, her eyes completely dead. She crossed her arms, standing in the bright entryway of the home I was no longer allowed to enter. "You are an ungrateful failure," she spat, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. "You will never amount to anything, and we refuse to let your pathetic attitude drag your sister down. Do not ever come back here." Then she slammed the heavy front door directly in my face. The sound of the deadbolt locking echoed loudly in the silent night, finalizing my sudden exile. I stood freezing in the dark for hours, having no money, no car, and nowhere to go. That night, sitting on a cold bus stop bench with a garbage bag of clothes, I learned a permanent lesson about blood ties. Biology simply means you share DNA, but it does not guarantee loyalty, love, or even basic human decency. That singular devastating night forged my entire work ethic. The burning humiliation of being called an ungrateful failure fueled every late-night coding session, every difficult certification exam, and every high-stakes business negotiation I ever faced. They had tried to break me so their golden child could shine brighter, unaware that throwing me into the darkness was exactly what forced me to learn how to generate my own light. Now, 15 years later, the tables have completely turned. The parents who tossed me out like trash are the ones cornered and panicking, desperately seeking an exit that does not exist. The sister who smirked while holding the keys bought with my stolen money is currently shaking in terror over a box of federal evidence. I pull myself out of the bitter memory, refocusing on the reality of the cathedral. The cold night air of my past is replaced by the secure, unyielding presence of my husband standing resolutely by my side. They thought I was still that helpless, sobbing 18-year-old girl. They are about to find out exactly what kind of woman that broken girl became. I did not beg them to let me back in. I walked away from that cold porch and never looked back. Surviving those first few years required a level of grit my parents could never comprehend. I secured a job scrubbing floors in a corporate office building on the night shift. While my sister posted pictures of her luxury vehicle and sorority parties, I emptied trash cans and wiped down bathroom sinks until my hands bled. I used every single paycheck to secure basic housing and fund my education. Instead of a traditional university experience, I bought heavy, outdated textbooks from thrift stores and spent my daylight hours sitting in public libraries, teaching myself the complex language of computer networks. I passed my first foundational IT certification by saving pennies for 6 months just to afford the testing fee. One certificate turned into two, and two turned into four. I moved from janitorial work to a low-level help desk position, answering phones for angry customers, while silently studying advanced coding languages during my breaks. I learned how to build firewalls, dismantle malware, and trace digital footprints across the globe. I became obsessed with security, perhaps because all physical security had been ripped away from me so violently. Over the next decade, I transformed that relentless obsession into an impenetrable empire. I relocated to Washington, District of Columbia, a city where digital defense is the ultimate currency. I launched my own cybersecurity consulting firm from a cramped studio apartment, taking on freelance contracts that larger companies deemed too tedious. I worked with absolute precision, delivering flawless results that quickly garnered attention from powerful defense contractors and federal agencies. My small operation rapidly expanded into a highly sought-after enterprise. I hired elite analysts, secured heavily fortified office space, and won incredibly lucrative government contracts. By my 30th birthday, the girl who was thrown out with a garbage bag of clothes was the sole owner and chief executive officer of a multi-million-dollar corporation. I commanded boardrooms filled with politicians and defense strategists, advising them on how to protect national infrastructure from foreign adversaries. I built fortresses of encrypted data, ensuring that my clients remained absolutely safe from catastrophic breaches. I possessed a fortune they could not fathom, but I kept my success completely invisible to the public eye. My family believed I was a destitute failure because I never corrected their malicious assumptions. I deliberately maintained a ghost profile on the internet, refusing to broadcast my immense wealth or my professional achievements. They desperately wanted me to be a cautionary tale, and I was perfectly content letting them believe their own arrogant fiction while I quietly amassed more power, capital, and influence than they would ever see in their entire lifetimes. My financial independence gave me the ultimate armor against their emotional manipulation. I no longer needed their validation, their money, or their toxic presence. I was a self-made titan operating entirely outside of their limited worldview. I was completely untouchable, an absolute force. It was precisely this high-level government work that brought Declan into my life. 3 years ago, my firm was contracted to conduct a massive, highly classified security audit for the Pentagon. We were tasked with identifying critical vulnerabilities in a communication network utilized exclusively by elite special operations units. Declan was the Navy SEAL commander, assigned to oversee the operational side of the network integration. Our first meeting took place in a windowless, heavily guarded briefing room deep within the Department of Defense. I expected a rigid, demanding military official who would dismiss a civilian contractor. Instead, I met a man whose raw intellect completely matched his imposing physical presence. Declan listened intently as I dismantled his current network architecture on a whiteboard, exposing every single flaw and potential breach point. He did not become defensive or arrogant. He simply asked sharp, insightful questions and demanded to know exactly how quickly my team could implement the necessary upgrades. We spent the next 6 months working closely together on the project, navigating complex security protocols and high-pressure deadlines. During those long hours reviewing code and analyzing threat assessments, a profound connection began to take root. We recognized a shared intensity in each other. Declan possessed a relentless drive to protect his team and serve his country, while I harbored a fierce determination to safeguard the systems that kept them alive. Our professional respect seamlessly evolved into a deep, unwavering personal bond. He learned about my past listening quietly as I recounted the bitter betrayal of my parents and my sister. He did not offer empty platitudes or suggest I forgive them for the sake of family harmony. He understood that loyalty is heavily earned through actions not demanded by bloodlines. Declan offered me everything my biological family severely lacked. He provided absolute honesty, fierce protection, and mutual respect. We built our relationship on a foundation of total transparency and shared ambition. When he proposed to me a year later, there was absolutely no hesitation. I knew I was marrying a man who would stand as an impenetrable shield against any force that tried to cause me harm. He knew exactly what my family was capable of, and he made a solemn vow to ensure they would never possess the power to hurt me again. Looking at him now, standing firm in the cathedral and issuing commands to lock down the venue, I feel an overwhelming surge of pure gratitude. My parents genuinely believed they could march into my wedding, toss a malicious threat at my feet, and watch me crumble into a helpless victim. They completely failed to comprehend that I am no longer fighting my battles alone. I am married to a man who commands elite warriors, and I possess the supreme digital authority to tear their entire world apart completely. The battle lines have been officially drawn, and we hold all the power right here, right now, and always. We win. My parents remain huddled near the heavy oak doors, visibly shaking as the massive deadbolts secure the cathedral. Their initial plan was remarkably simple and deeply malicious. They had tracked down my wedding registry through a distant relative, fully expecting to arrive at a cheap, pathetic gathering. For the past 15 years, they maintained a firm, unyielding belief that my life was a complete failure. Because I never engaged with their taunts or corrected their aggressive assumptions, they built an elaborate fiction regarding my circumstances. In their minds, I was still just a broke, struggling girl fixing broken laptops for hourly wages. They assumed I lived in a rundown apartment clipping coupons and barely scraping by. They crashed my ceremony today, anticipating a sad little backyard event, maybe a public park pavilion, or a rented community center with plastic chairs and paper plates. They wanted to march down a flimsy aisle, hand over their sinister little gift box, and mock my modest lifestyle in front of whatever working-class friends they assumed I had scraped together. They thrived on the illusion of my poverty because my supposed financial struggle validated their terrible parenting choices. It allowed them to sleep perfectly well at night, completely convinced that choosing Brittany over me was the correct moral decision. They wanted to witness my misery firsthand, to bask in the confirmation that abandoning me at 18 was precisely what I deserved. As they stand trapped against the intricately carved wooden doors, the absolute absurdity of their assumption begins to crush them. They are not standing in a cheap community center. They are trapped inside a breathtaking historic cathedral with towering vaulted ceilings, original stained glass windows, and massive floral arrangements consisting of thousands of imported white orchids. The string quartet they interrupted was a prestigious ensemble hired for a premium fee. They begin to notice the attendees sitting in the pews. They do not see struggling hourly workers. They see men and women dressed in custom-tailored suits and haute couture gowns. They see polished military brass stern-faced intelligence analysts and powerful corporate executives holding high-level security clearances. The room radiates extreme wealth and immense federal authority that Harrison and Brenda have never experienced. The stark contrast between their arrogant expectations and the terrifying reality of the room leaves them utterly speechless. Their brains short-circuit as they try to process how the daughter they threw away like garbage managed to orchestrate a wedding that clearly cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. The illusion of my pathetic existence, the very foundation of their parental pride, is rapidly disintegrating right in front of their eyes. Brenda grips the edge of a mahogany pew, her knuckles turning stark white as she stares at the sheer opulence surrounding her. The narrative she spoon-fed her wealthy friends for over a decade is officially dead. I am not the tragic, penniless outcast she painted me to be. She finally realizes that I never needed her approval, and I certainly never needed her money. The power she thought she held over me was nothing but a fragile fantasy. I am a massive success. The initial terror of the lockdown slowly gives way to a different, far more repulsive emotion. I watch Harrison closely as his eyes dart across the magnificent cathedral. His gaze moves rapidly from the towering floral displays to the intricate diamond detailing on my custom silk gown. He evaluates the unmistakable luxury of the venue, calculating the sheer monetary value of the event with rapid, predatory precision. The panic of being trapped by active-duty military personnel momentarily vanishes from his face, entirely replaced by a sudden sickening gleam of pure greed. He completely forgets the severe federal offense sitting on the table near the altar. He ignores the blinking GPS tracker and the encrypted flash drive that could send him to a federal penitentiary. The only thing Harrison sees is capital. His posture shifts immediately. The cowering, frightened old man straightens his back and steps away from the locked doors. He adjusts his suit jacket, puffing out his chest as he attempts to regain his authoritative presence. He looks at me, really looks at me for the first time in 15 years. He does not see the daughter he discarded. He sees a massive, untapped financial asset. He sees a golden goose. Brenda notices his shift in demeanor and quickly follows his lead. She wipes her tear-streaked face, pasting on a fragile, highly practiced smile that makes my stomach churn. She takes a tentative step forward, acting as if the heavily armed men securing the room are merely an overzealous security detail rather than a tactical lockdown. Harrison clears his throat, projecting his voice across the silent room. He completely ignores the stolen military hardware and focuses entirely on the wealth. "Well, Rebecca," he announces, attempting to sound like a proud, magnanimous patriarch, "I must admit you have certainly kept secrets from your family. This is an incredibly lavish affair. It seems you have done quite well for yourself after all." The absolute audacity of his statement hangs heavily in the air. He actually believes he can smooth over an active espionage investigation by complimenting my financial status. He thinks the money changes everything. He assumes my wealth instantly bridges the 15-year gap of abuse, neglect, and betrayal. In his twisted reality, success demands familial reconciliation regardless of past sins. He takes another step down the aisle, completely disregarding the warning glare from Declan. "We clearly have a lot of catching up to do," Harrison continues, offering a wide, fake smile. "Family is family, no matter how much time has passed. We are extremely proud of the woman you have become, and we are ready to put the past behind us." The sheer delusion is staggering. He is standing inches away from a federal crime scene, yet he is already plotting how to manipulate my bank accounts to serve his own desperate needs. He has no idea the devastating trap he just walked into, He thinks he can control me again. He is about to lose everything. Brittany shatters the heavy silence that follows our father's delusional speech. She lets out a high-pitched, incredibly forced laugh that echoes awkwardly off the stone walls. Her hands are visibly shaking as she smooths down the front of her inappropriate white cocktail dress. She steps away from our parents, trying to project the image of a playful sibling whose harmless joke has been blown entirely out of proportion by paranoid military men. She points a trembling finger at the black plastic casing resting on the table. "You guys are taking this way too seriously," Brittany stammers, her voice cracking as she attempts to sound lighthearted. "It is just a prank, a silly wedding joke. We wanted to see where you two were going for your honeymoon since you refused to send us an itinerary. The tracker was just a funny way to keep tabs on my big sister. We bought it online for $20. She looks around the room, desperately seeking validation from the crowd. None of the guests return her smile. The intelligence officers and defense contractors stare back at her with absolute disgust. Claiming a military-grade tracking device and an encrypted data payload are part of a $20 gag gift is an insult to the intelligence of everyone present. Brenda immediately seizes the opportunity to reinforce the golden child's narrative. She drops her fake smile and marches forward, her face twisting into a mask of pure indignation. She completely ignores the severe federal implications hanging over the room and zeroes in on her favorite target. "Rebecca! This is absolutely shameful," Brenda scolds, her voice dripping with venom. "Your sister went out of her way to bring you a fun, thoughtful present, and you allow your husband to treat her like a terrorist. You have completely humiliated her in front of all these people. You need to call off these aggressive thugs right now and apologize to Brittany immediately. You are ruining your own wedding with this dramatic, paranoid behavior." Brenda crosses her arms, waiting for me to bow my head and comply. For 15 years, this exact tactic worked flawlessly. Whenever Brittany crossed a line or destroyed my property, Brenda would gaslight me into believing I was the one at fault for overreacting. She expects the same submission now. She expects me to command Declan to stand down, to sweep the felony under the rug, to save the family image. She demands that I take responsibility for the toxic chaos they dragged into a sacred space. I do not lower my gaze. I do not offer a single word of apology. I look at Brittany, watching the sweat bead on her forehead as her ridiculous lie hangs suspended in the tense air. The burner phone is still actively transmitting data, its screen glowing brightly against the dark foam padding. The silence stretches, suffocating their pathetic attempt at manipulation. The military personnel in the room do not budge an inch. The impenetrable silence is broken by heavy footsteps echoing against the marble floor. Andre steps out from the periphery of the crowd, his posture rigid. At 34 years old, my African-American brother-in-law is a man who operates on absolute precision and undeniable integrity. As a senior financial auditor for a major corporate firm, his entire career is built on identifying discrepancies, uncovering fraud, and demanding the truth. Up until this very moment, he has remained completely unaware of the sinister plot orchestrated by his wife and her parents. He genuinely believed they were attending a simple low-budget wedding to offer a peace branch. Andre bypasses Harrison and Brenda, walking straight up to the isolated table where Liam is heavily guarding the open box. He does not reach out to touch the devices, but he leans over slightly, his sharp eyes evaluating the hardware with terrifying clarity. He notes the specific model of the micro GPS tracker. He registers the military-grade encryption casing on the heavy-duty flash drive. He understands asset valuation better than anyone else in the room. He slowly turns away from the table and faces his wife. The look of profound betrayal on his face makes my breath catch. Brittany shrinks away from him, her false confidence completely disintegrating under his intense scrutiny. "Do not lie to me," Andre says. His voice is dangerously low, rumbling with a quiet, devastating fury that cuts through the tension in the room. "I know exactly what kind of hardware that is. That is not a $20 gag gift from the internet. That equipment costs thousands of dollars on the secondary market." Brittany shakes her head frantically, reaching a trembling hand out toward him. "Andre, baby, please." she whispers desperately, trying to maintain her innocent facade. It was just a stupid joke. My parents helped me buy it. Andre slaps her hand away before she can make contact. He steps closer, backing her up against the edge of a wooden pew. His eyes are wide with a horrifying realization. He is mentally calculating numbers, connecting the dots of their personal finances. We are 3 months behind on our mortgage, Andre says, his voice vibrating with absolute rage. We are drowning in debt. We can barely afford groceries right now. I have been working 70-hour weeks just to keep the lights on in our house. He points a shaking finger directly at the open box on the table. Where did you get the money to buy thousands of dollars worth of illegal surveillance gear? The question hangs in the air, sharp and inescapable. The entire narrative constructed by my parents shatters instantly. This is no longer just about a ruined wedding or a petty sibling rivalry. Andre has just exposed a massive, glaring financial contradiction. The financial web they wove in secret is finally unraveling in front of everyone. Brittany's face drains of all color. She opens her mouth to speak, but no words come out. She looks desperately at Harrison and Brenda, but they are equally paralyzed. The golden child is officially cornered by her own husband, and the undeniable truth is about to tear their entire world apart completely. Brittany stammers, her mouth opening and closing as she desperately searches for a lie that might save her. She looks at our parents for help, her eyes wide with a frantic plea for rescue. The silence from her is a confession in itself. Harrison immediately steps forward, his face flushed with a dark, ugly red. He attempts to use his physical size to intimidate my brother-in-law, stepping right into Andre's personal space. Harrison points a thick finger directly at Andre's chest, trying to project the authority of a patriarch who is accustomed to absolute obedience. Now see here, Andre Harrison barks, his voice dripping with condescension. You need to calm down and stay out of family business. This is a private matter between my daughters, and you have absolutely no right to interrogate my child in public. You do not understand the complexities of our family dynamics. Andre does not back down an inch. He is a professional financial auditor who spends his days dismantling corporate fraud, and he is entirely immune to Harrison's pathetic attempts at bullying. Andre slaps Harrison's pointing hand away with a swift, decisive motion that makes my father stumble back in shock. Do not tell me to stay out of family business. Andre fires back, his voice echoing with absolute fury. When my wife purchases military-grade surveillance gear while we are defaulting on our mortgage, it becomes my business. My name is on those bank accounts. My signature is on the loan for our house. My personal credit and my professional license are directly tied to her financial actions. He turns his blazing glare back to Brittany, who is now openly weeping, pressing her back against the wooden pew, as if trying to merge with it. I want an answer right now, Andre demands, refusing to let her escape his scrutiny. We have zero disposable income. We are drowning in final notices from collection agencies. I review our accounts every single week, and there was absolutely no withdrawal large enough to cover this kind of advanced tactical hardware. Where did the money come from, Brittany? Who paid for the tracking device and the encrypted drive? Brittany covers her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Brenda rushes forward, wrapping her arms around her golden child and glaring at Andre as if he is the villain. How dare you speak to your wife this way, Brenda shrieks, attempting to deflect the very real financial questions with emotional manipulation. She is a stressed mother. You are being financially abusive by questioning her every move. We helped her buy the gift because we knew you were struggling. We were just trying to do something nice for Rebecca. Andre laughs, a harsh, humorless sound that cuts straight through Brenda's ridiculous lies. You bought her a burner phone and a tracking beacon as a nice gesture, he asks, his tone laced with absolute disgust. I know exactly what those devices cost. I know what they are used for. You did not buy a blender. You bought the tools required to commit a federal crime, and my wife handed those tools to a Navy SEAL commander. Andre steps away from Brenda and Brittany, running a shaking hand over his face. He realizes his entire life is tied to a woman who just willingly participated in suspected espionage. He looks at Harrison, his eyes narrowed with sharp suspicion. If you bought this equipment, Harrison, then you are equally responsible. But I know for a fact that your business has been bleeding money for months. You do not have the capital to fund this kind of operation either. Someone is lying about where the money came from, and I am going to find out exactly who it is. The chaotic arguments fade as I take control. I step down from the elevated altar, leaving Declan's protective shadow. My silk gown rustles against the marble floor as I walk toward the isolated table where Liam guards the box. My eyes are locked completely on the matte black USB flash drive resting inside the plastic casing. Brenda notices my movement and begins to panic again. She lunges forward, her voice cracking as she screams at me to stop. "Rebecca, leave the gift alone!" Brenda shrieks, waving her arms frantically in a desperate bid to distract me. "Do not touch that drive. You are overreacting and ruining your own wedding. Listen to your mother for once in your life and just walk away from it." I completely ignore her frantic shrieks. Her desperate commands hold absolutely zero power over me. I bypass the table entirely and continue walking straight down the side aisle toward the private bridal suite located near the back of the cathedral. The heavy wooden door clicks shut behind me, muting the intense shouting match from the main hall. Inside the quiet room, I bypass the makeup bags and champagne flutes, reaching straight for my reinforced travel case. I pull out my primary work laptop, a heavily modified military-grade machine equipped with an air-gapped operating system designed specifically to safely dissect malicious payloads and highly classified data drops. I secure the laptop and march back into the cathedral. The guests part silently to let me through, their eyes fixed on the heavy machinery I am carrying. Brenda attempts to block my path to the table, her face a mask of absolute terror, but Thomas steps smoothly in front of her, easily brushing her aside. I set my laptop down directly next to the exposed surveillance hardware. My mind shifts into the hyper-focused analytical state that built my multi-million-dollar cybersecurity empire. They wanted to deliver a digital threat, assuming I was too weak and incompetent to fight back. They remain completely oblivious to the fact that I am a digital executioner. I pick up the encrypted USB drive. It is time to dissect exactly what kind of poison my biological family tried to inject into my new life. I slide the heavy metal flash drive into the isolated port of my machine. Because my laptop operates on a strict air-gapped system entirely physically disconnected from any wireless networks or Bluetooth signals, the malicious payload inside the drive cannot execute its remote commands or wipe its own memory. It is permanently trapped inside my digital sandbox. I type a rapid sequence of commands into my terminal, bringing up my proprietary decryption software. I reach across the isolated table and grab the thick display cable connected directly to the cathedral's massive audiovisual system. The enormous screens suspended high above the altar were originally set up to project a beautiful montage of Declan and me. I plug the cable firmly into my laptop. The giant screens flicker for a fraction of a second before illuminating the entire cathedral with a mirrored display of my command line interface. A collective murmur ripples through the 200 guests as lines of bright code begin scrolling rapidly across the massive projection screens. Every high-ranking military official, every corporate executive, and every intelligence analyst in the room now has a front-row seat to my investigation. Brenda screams, lunging forward with her arms outstretched, desperately trying to yank the cable from the wall. Liam intercepts her, instantly forcing her back into the wooden pew with a stern warning. Harrison yells that this is a massive violation of their privacy, demanding that someone arrest me for illegal hacking. His hollow threats echo uselessly off the cold stone walls. Declan remains standing firmly beside me, his eyes locked on the projected screen, his posture radiating absolute authority. I ignore my parents completely and focus entirely on the cryptographic handshake securing the drive. The hardware utilizes an advanced encryption standard typically reserved for elite corporate espionage. Whoever they hired on the black market to build this drive possessed serious technical skills, but they severely underestimated the person they were trying to target. I launch a custom algorithm specifically designed to shatter this exact type of security protocol. The progress bar on the giant screens fills steadily. Andre steps closer to the projection, his eyes narrowing as he realizes the sheer scale of the operation his wife funded. Brittany covers her face with her hands, sobbing loudly as the green progress bar hits 100%. The final decryption wall shatters. The system grants me total access to the root directory. The terminal window vanishes immediately, replaced by a clean, perfectly organized file structure projected at 50 feet wide for the entire cathedral to witness. The sheer volume of data is staggering. We are looking at several gigabytes of highly organized, meticulously crafted digital files. I place my hands flat on the table, taking a slow breath as I navigate to the master folder. I prepare myself to confront whatever toxic scheme my biological family manufactured to destroy my life. I double-click the first subfolder. The screens above the altar refresh, instantly exposing the absolute depths of their depravity. The first document that opens on the massive screens is a highly detailed email chain. At first glance, it looks like a standard military communication log, but the subject lines make my stomach drop. The emails are perfectly forged to look exactly as though they originated from Declan's secure naval server. They detail specific, highly classified troop movements, submarine deployment schedules, and tactical operational blueprints. The recipient addresses trace back to known servers associated with foreign intelligence agencies. My family paid someone to fabricate a digital trail indicating that a decorated Navy SEAL commander was actively selling top-secret military intelligence to overseas enemies. I hear a sharp intake of breath from the generals seated in the front rows. Declan does not flinch, but his jaw tightens into a lethal, unforgiving line as he reads the treasonous lies projected above us. I quickly open the next folder, my fingers flying across the keyboard. This directory is labeled Financial Discrepancies and contains hundreds of spreadsheets. I open the master ledger, displaying it for the entire cathedral. As a cybersecurity consultant, my entire livelihood relies on absolute trust and unshakable federal compliance. The spreadsheets on the screen show millions of dollars moving through offshore bank accounts, filtering directly into the corporate accounts of my cybersecurity firm. They have meticulously crafted falsified financial records, framing my company for international money laundering. The fake ledgers show me systematically cleaning dirty money for overseas syndicates, using my federal defense contracts as a legitimate front to wash illicit funds. The sheer malice required to fabricate this level of destruction is utterly breathtaking. These documents were not designed to merely embarrass us. They were engineered to trigger an immediate catastrophic raid by federal authorities. If this USB drive had been planted in our home or anonymously mailed to a federal tip line, heavily armed agents would have kicked down our front door by midnight. Our bank accounts would have been permanently frozen. Declan would have been stripped of his command and thrown into a military prison under suspicion of treason. I would have lost my company, my security clearance, and my freedom. They wanted to obliterate our lives completely. They wanted us facing decades in a federal penitentiary. The crowd of guests murmurs in absolute horror, fully grasping the apocalyptic scale of the frame-up. I look away from the giant screens and turn my gaze directly to Harrison and Brenda. They are no longer shouting. They are staring at the floor, their faces pale and slick with terrified sweat. Brittany is hyperventilating in the corner, clutching her white cocktail dress as Andre steps entirely away from her. The undeniable evidence of their sinister plot is burning bright on the screens above the altar for the whole world to see. They came to my wedding to deliver a death sentence. Now the executioners are the ones trapped inside the cage. The level of detail embedded within these forged directories is truly terrifying. Whoever orchestrated this digital assassination understood the exact protocols of federal investigations. They did not just create a few fake emails. They fabricated an entire alternate reality. I pull up the metadata on the projected screen, showing the crowd the spoofed IP addresses and the artificially generated timestamps. Every single file was engineered to pass a preliminary forensic analysis. If my parents had succeeded in planting this hardware in our home, or if they had mailed this encrypted drive to a government whistleblower hotline, the fallout would have been immediate and apocalyptic. Within hours of receiving this manufactured evidence, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Naval Criminal Investigative Service would have formed a joint task force. They would have secured a no-knock warrant based on the sheer severity of the treason allegations. Heavily armed tactical units would have breached our front door in the middle of the night. Declan would have been pulled from his bed, slammed to the floor, and dragged out in handcuffs in front of our neighbors. His distinguished military career, built on decades of blood sacrifice and unbreakable honor, would have been extinguished in a matter of seconds. He would have been thrown into a maximum security military holding facility, denied bail as a severe flight risk, and branded a traitor to his country. My fate would have been equally catastrophic. The fabricated ledgers linking my cybersecurity firm to international syndicates would have triggered an automatic and permanent freeze on all my personal and corporate assets. My accounts would drop to zero instantly. My elite staff would be interrogated and subsequently blacklisted from the defense sector. I would have been stripped of my federal clearance, locked in an interrogation room, and charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. We would have had absolutely no access to our wealth to hire defense attorneys. The government would seize our home, our vehicles, and our companies under civil asset forfeiture laws before a trial even began. We would be completely ruined, left rotting in separate federal prisons for the rest of our natural lives, all based on a lie manufactured by the people who share my DNA. They designed a digital guillotine perfectly tailored to sever our heads. The sheer malice required to pay hackers to construct this exact scenario goes far beyond simple jealousy. This is not petty familial resentment. This is a highly calculated, cold-blooded strategy designed to trigger the full, devastating weight of the United States justice system against an innocent naval officer and a self-made businesswoman. They weaponize the federal government to perform a hit job. The guests in the cathedral process this terrifying reality. The silence is absolute, heavy with the suffocating realization of how close my family came to annihilating us. I step away from the podium and walk slowly down the marble steps of the altar. The heavy silk of my wedding gown glides silently across the floor as I close the distance between myself and my biological parents. The seals maintaining the perimeter do not shift, keeping the exit firmly blocked. Harrison and Brenda press themselves against the heavy wooden doors, physically recoiling from my approach. Brittany cowers behind them, clutching her inappropriate white dress, her earlier arrogance entirely replaced by the trembling reality of a cornered criminal. Andre stands firmly off to the side, his arms crossed tightly across his chest, offering his wife absolutely no protection. I stop exactly 3 feet away from my father. I do not raise my voice. I do not shed a single tear. I am completely devoid of emotion. The scared, vulnerable 18-year-old girl they threw onto the freezing porch 15 years ago is officially dead. I am a machine now, calculating, precise, and utterly ruthless. I look directly into Harrison's wide, terrified eyes. "You didn't come to ruin my wedding," I state, my voice echoing clearly through the massive cathedral, slicing through the thick tension. "You came to ruin my life and send my husband to federal prison." "Why?" Harrison swallows hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He attempts to puff out his chest, falling back on his decades of aggressive posturing, but his knees are visibly shaking. "Rebecca, you are taking this entirely out of context." He stammers, his voice lacking any of its usual booming authority. "This is a massive misunderstanding. We were just trying to ensure you were safe. We heard rumors about Declan, about his military connections, and we hired an investigator to look into him. This drive was supposed to be a warning to you, not a threat." I stare at him, my expression perfectly flat. "You are lying," I reply instantly. "You did not hire a standard private investigator. You hired black market hackers to fabricate highly classified naval communications. You planted a live tracking beacon. You spoofed my corporate financial ledgers to simulate offshore money laundering. You engineered a flawless federal frame-up. None of this is a warning. This is an execution protocol." I take one step closer, invading his space, forcing him to press his back flat against the locked doors. I demand an answer, Harrison. You despise me. You abandoned me. You have ignored my entire existence for 15 years. So why spend tens of thousands of dollars on military-grade surveillance and illegal hackers just to frame my husband for treason on my wedding day? What is the actual objective? Harrison opens his mouth, but only a pathetic, breathless sound escapes. Brenda buries her face in her hands, sobbing loudly, utterly incapable of formulating another lie. They are trapped. The Grand Cathedral, packed with federal agents and military commanders, feels like a courtroom waiting for a confession. I hold my ground, staring into the eyes of the man who gave me half my DNA, waiting for the ugly, rotting truth to finally spill out. The tension in the cathedral thickens until it is nearly impossible to breathe. They thought they could execute a covert strike and walk away clean. They never anticipated that I possessed the exact skill set required to dismantle their weapon in front of an audience of highly trained military operators. Now they must answer for their crimes. When Harrison refuses to speak, sealing his lips in a pathetic attempt to retain a shred of dignity, I simply nod. I do not need a confession from a coward. I turn my back on my terrified parents and walk swiftly back to the isolated table where my heavily encrypted laptop sits. If my biological father will not hand me the truth voluntarily, I will extract it from the digital ether myself. I place my hands on the keyboard and bring up a highly specialized proprietary scraping algorithm my firm utilizes for deep web financial forensics. It is a tool designed to track dark money through encrypted offshore routing systems. I input the legal names, social security numbers, and primary corporate tax identification codes for Harrison, Brenda, and Brittany. I route the query through a series of anonymous proxy servers and hit execute. The massive projection screens above the altar shift instantly. The fabricated military documents vanish, replaced by a stark black terminal window. Rapid lines of brilliant white code begin cascading across the 50-foot display. The audio-visual system hums as my program actively bypasses consumer-grade firewalls, diving straight into restricted banking registries and hidden shell company databases. Brenda lets out a high-pitched shriek, finally realizing that her perfectly manicured public image is about to be violently dissected in front of high society. This is a direct public execution of their carefully curated lies. She begs me to close the laptop, claiming that financial records are a private family matter. I ignore her completely. I type another command, narrowing the search parameters to flag any massive capital losses, illegal equity transfers, or impending federal audits triggered within the last 90 days. The guests watch the massive screens in absolute silence, captivated by the real-time destruction of my family's facade. Declan steps closer to me. His arms crossed, his tactical gaze sweeping over the frantic reactions of my parents. He knows exactly what I am doing. I am stripping away their armor. Harrison lunges forward, desperately attempting to reach the laptop cable, but two Navy SEALs instantly step into his path, forcing him back with a single synchronized movement. The physical barrier is absolute. He can only stand there, chest heaving with panic, as the progress bar on the giant screen reaches 100%. The algorithm finishes its global sweep. The terminal window splits into 3 distinct data columns, one for each of my toxic family members. The system automatically highlights the most critical data points. The projected screens flash violently before settling on the final forensic financial report. The numbers do not appear in standard black text. They hit the giant display in bold, glowing red font, signifying catastrophic, unrecoverable debt. I look up at the screen, analyzing the data structure, and a cold, ruthless smile finally breaks across my face. The absolute irony of their situation is staggering. I turn to face my parents and my sister, who are now trembling uncontrollably under the crushing weight of the exposed truth. I read the numbers aloud, my voice amplifying through the cathedral speakers. "You are not wealthy," I announce, my tone echoing with lethal clarity. "You are completely, hopelessly bankrupt." The screens show a collective negative balance of exactly $1.5 million. I scroll down, pulling up the routing history of their most recent capital transfers. The data reveals a frantic, desperate funneling of cash into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. It is an offshore investment fund that federal regulatory agencies flagged and dismantled precisely 2 months ago. It was not a legitimate business venture. It was a massive illegal Ponzi scheme. Harrison, Brenda, and Brittany did not just lose their money in a bad stock market trade. They actively participated in a fraudulent international syndicate chasing the promise of exorbitant tax-free returns to fund their luxurious, arrogant lifestyle. When the Ponzi scheme collapsed completely 60 days ago, it wiped out every single dollar they possessed. But it gets much worse for them. I pull up the impending legal actions flagged by the algorithm. The screens display active pending federal indictments. Because they knowingly recruited other wealthy investors into the fraudulent syndicate to cover their own initial buy-in, they are not just victims of the scheme. They are legally classified as co-conspirators. They played a highly dangerous game with federal regulators, and they lost spectacularly. They are currently under investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Internal Revenue Service. They are facing imminent total asset seizure and decades in federal prison for wire fraud and tax evasion. Their mansion, their luxury cars, and their entire pathetic existence are about to be confiscated by the United States government. I look down at Brittany. She has collapsed onto a wooden pew, her face buried in her hands, her white cocktail dress looking ridiculous against the backdrop of her absolute financial ruin. Brenda is leaning heavily against the locked oak doors, hyperventilating as the elite wedding guests whisper in utter disgust. Harrison stares at the glowing red numbers on the 50-foot screens, utterly and completely broken. Their motivation is suddenly crystal clear to every single person in the cathedral. They did not target me out of petty spite or lingering childhood resentment. They targeted me because they are staring down the barrel of a lengthy federal prison sentence, and they desperately needed a scapegoat with immense capital to buy their way out of hell. They were perfectly willing to let my husband rot in a military prison just to cover their own tracks. They needed a massive influx of untraceable cash, and they decided that destroying my life was the easiest way to save their own. I step back toward the center of the altar, making sure my voice carries to the furthest corners of the vaulted ceiling. I need every military official, every corporate executive, and every friend in this room to understand the exact anatomy of this betrayal. You did not just want my money, I state clearly, locking my eyes onto my father. You needed a perfectly timed crisis. I can see the entire extortion strategy playing out exactly as you designed it. You intended to drop this malicious hardware today, masking it as a petty wedding stunt. Within 48 hours, the tracking beacon and the transmitting phone would have alerted federal authorities to a massive fabricated intelligence leak originating right from our home. NCIS agents would have swarmed our property. They would have dragged Declan out in chains, charging him with the highest form of military treason. I paced slowly across the marble floor, forcing my parents to listen to the brutal deconstruction of their master plan. Once my husband was locked in a military holding cell, stripped of his command and his dignity, the media would have descended. The scandal would have been absolute. I would have been completely isolated, terrified, and desperate to prove his innocence. The government would have immediately scrutinized my cybersecurity firm, matching the fabricated ledgers on your USB drive. My clients would have fled. My reputation would have shattered. I would have been drowning in a state of absolute blinding terror, wondering how my flawless life had disintegrated overnight. And that is exactly when you would have made your entrance. I point directly at Brenda, who flinches as if physically struck. You would have driven straight to my house, playing the role of the devoted, loving parents. You would have pushed your way through my front door with open arms, offering me a shoulder to cry on. You would have told me how deeply sorry you were for the past, how family must stick together during the darkest storms. You would have capitalized on my paralyzing fear, using my desperation to completely bypass all my rational defenses. You calculated that a woman fighting to save her husband from federal prison would be too exhausted to question the sudden miraculous reappearance of her estranged parents. Harrison would have stepped up as the wise patriarch. I continue shifting my gaze to my father, whose face is now slick with cold sweat. You would have offered to handle the complex business matters while I focused entirely on saving my husband from a firing squad. You would have convinced me that running a multi-million-dollar firm was too much for a grieving, panicked wife to manage alone. You would have told me that you needed to take the reins to protect my assets, to hire the best defense attorneys in the country to save Declan's life. You would have weaponized my love for my husband to gain total, unrestricted access to my corporate infrastructure. Your entire strategy relied on my willingness to sacrifice everything I owned to protect the man I love. You would have exploited the very real trauma of a federal investigation. You knew that navigating the judicial system requires intense focus and massive capital. By offering to shoulder the operational weight of my company, you would have presented yourselves as my only lifeline. You intended to play the role of my saviors, stepping in to manage my digital empire, while I supposedly focused on gathering character witnesses and building a defense strategy for Declan. It was a brilliantly twisted psychological game. You wanted to make me entirely dependent on the same people who secretly engineered my destruction. But hiring defense attorneys was never the actual objective. I announced, my voice hardening into a blade of pure ice. I turned my attention back to the massive projection screens where the glowing red numbers of their catastrophic $1.5 million Ponzi scheme debt remain illuminated for the entire crowd. There would be no high-priced lawyers for Declan. There would be no rescue mission. Your offers of familial support were nothing more than a Trojan horse designed to bypass my security and access my vault. In reality, you planned to use my emotional devastation to force a transfer of power. You would have placed a stack of legal documents in front of me while I was crying over my husband's impending treason trial. You would have told me it was just standard paperwork required to free up capital for legal fees. You would have manipulated me into signing over full power of attorney. The absolute second my signature hit that paper, you would have initiated a total ruthless liquidation of my cybersecurity firm. You would have drained my corporate accounts, sold off my proprietary software assets, and completely gutted the empire I spent 10 years building from the ground up. You needed untraceable capital, and my company was the perfect sacrificial lamb. Once you hijacked my funds, you would have immediately wired the cash offshore to pay off your massive illegal debt, saving yourselves from the Securities and Exchange Commission and your angry criminal creditors. And once the money was gone, you would have vanished without a single trace. The sheer audacity of your plan is truly staggering. You assumed I would be too blinded by grief and panic to audit my own financial statements or question the rapid depletion of my corporate funds. You banked on my vulnerability. You intended to strip mine every single asset I possessed, leaving my employees jobless and my reputation entirely radioactive in the defense sector. You would have boarded a flight to some non-extradition country using my money, while the FBI dismantled my home looking for non-existent espionage hardware. You did not just want to steal from me. You wanted to completely obliterate my existence so you could walk away with a clean slate. I take one final step toward my parents, dropping my voice to a terrifying, deadly register. You would have taken my life savings to buy your own freedom, and you would have left Declan and me to face the federal government entirely alone. You would have let a decorated Navy SEAL commander rot in a military prison for a crime he never committed. You would have let your own biological daughter face decades in a federal penitentiary for international money laundering. You were perfectly willing to completely destroy our lives, our freedom, and our future just to erase the financial consequences of your own disgusting greed. I turned back to my laptop, my fingers striking the keys with rapid precision to open the next highly encrypted folder extracted from their malicious drive. The giant screens above the altar shift again, displaying a series of scanned banking documents and property deeds. I want everyone in this room to understand exactly how deeply you committed to my destruction, I announce, my voice echoing over the silent crowd. Hiring elite black market hackers to fabricate top-secret military communications is incredibly expensive. Purchasing restricted military-grade tracking hardware requires heavy capital on the dark web. So how does a family drowning in a massive Ponzi scheme debt afford to finance a highly sophisticated federal frame-up? The screens reveal a cascade of property records highlighting a series of desperate, catastrophic financial decisions. You remortgaged your house, I state coldly, pointing at the damning evidence hovering 50 feet in the air. Not just once, but twice. You took out massive high-interest equity loans against your primary residence, leveraging the absolute last shreds of your personal wealth just to buy the tools needed to ruin me. You literally bet your entire remaining livelihood on the absolute certainty that you could send my husband to a military prison and steal my corporate assets. You sat in a bank manager's office and signed away the deed to your home smiling while you actively plotted my total destruction. Harrison stares at the property records, his jaw trembling uncontrollably. Brenda covers her mouth, stifling a sob, as the reality of their complete financial annihilation becomes public knowledge. You did not just make a poor investment choice. I continue refusing to let them look away from the screens. You actively chose to double down on your own greed. The ledgers here show a wire transfer of $50,000 routed through a cryptocurrency tumbler just to secure the encrypted USB drive. Another $30,000 was paid to the anonymous developers who crafted the fake Pentagon emails. You liquidated your retirement accounts and drained your emergency funds, leaving yourselves with absolutely nothing but a desperate hope that I would be too stupid to catch you. You traded your home, your shelter, and your future for the opportunity to execute a flawless digital assassination against your own daughter. This was your final desperate gamble. You assumed my multi-million-dollar company would easily cover the cost of the hackers, the tracking equipment, and the $1.5 million debt you owed to your illegal syndicate. You treated my life and Declan's freedom as nothing more than chips on a casino table, placing your final bet on our absolute devastation. You leveraged everything you had to guarantee our downfall, completely oblivious to the fact that you were walking straight into an impenetrable fortress. The sheer level of financial desperation required to execute this plot is staggering. You bankrupted yourselves twice over just to purchase the weapons you intended to use against me, entirely blind to the reality that I would seize those exact weapons and use them to dismantle your entire existence. As the sheer magnitude of the financial desperation and malicious planning sets in, the heavy silence inside the cathedral finally breaks. A low, undeniable murmur of absolute disgust begins to ripple through the 200 guests seated in the pews. These are not ordinary people easily swayed by emotional family drama. These are seasoned intelligence analysts, cutthroat corporate executives, and decorated military commanders who understand exactly what genuine treason and extortion look like. They are looking at Harrison and Brenda not as misguided parents, but as highly dangerous domestic threats who attempted to orchestrate a catastrophic federal security breach. A four-star general seated in the second row shakes his head in visible revulsion, his eyes locked on the projected evidence of the fabricated naval intelligence. Several defense contractors sitting near the center aisle begin whispering sharply to one another, completely appalled by the calculated depravity required to frame an active duty SEAL commander. The collective realization sweeping through the grand venue is palpable. The crowd now fully understands that this was never a simple case of petty jealousy or toxic sibling rivalry. This was not about a golden child wanting to upstage her estranged sister at a wedding. This was a highly orchestrated, malicious extortion plot designed to trigger a federal crisis for personal financial gain. Harrison looks out at the sea of disgusted faces, desperately searching for a single sympathetic gaze. He finds absolutely nothing but cold, unyielding contempt. The high society elite he spent his entire life trying to impress, the powerful individuals he constantly bragged about knowing, are currently looking at him as if he is a diseased rat. The social standing he valued above all else evaporates instantly. Brenda shrinks against the heavy oak doors, desperately trying to hide from the piercing, judgmental stares of the very people she intended to manipulate. She realizes that her carefully curated reputation as a loving, wealthy matriarch is permanently destroyed. There is no coming back from this level of public exposure. The guests do not see a grieving mother or a misunderstood father. They see calculated criminals who are perfectly willing to commit severe federal offenses to save their own skin. They see a family utterly devoid of a moral compass, driven by a greed so profound it borders on sociopathic. Declan's squad mates maintain their rigid perimeter, their expressions hardened into masks of lethal professionalism as they watch the crowd turn entirely against my biological family. The atmosphere shifts from shock to a simmering collective outrage. The absolute certainty of their guilt leaves no room for debate or pity. The people in this room have dedicated their lives to protecting this country, and they are openly repulsed by the realization that my parents attempted to weaponize the justice system to execute a financial hit job. The overwhelming judgment from the crowd crushes Harrison and Brenda far more effectively than any physical blow ever could. They are entirely exposed, stripped of their lies, and isolated in a room full of powerful allies who are completely prepared to watch them fall. I turn my attention away from my shattered parents and look directly at my sister. Brittany is still cowering on the wooden pew, her face buried in her hands, desperately hoping the spotlight will not shift back to her. But I am not finished. There is one final layer to this catastrophic betrayal, and it is entirely hers. I place my hands back on the keyboard and navigate to the very last encrypted folder extracted from the flash drive. The directory is simply labeled Initial Capital Acquisition. I click the file, and the massive projection screens above the altar instantly refresh. Dozens of highly detailed multi-page commercial loan applications cascade across the display. I amplify my voice, ensuring every single syllable echoes clearly through the silent cathedral. We have established how Harrison and Brenda financed their portion of this illegal espionage plot, I announce, pointing at the towering screens. But entering an exclusive offshore Ponzi scheme requires a massive, upfront cash buy-in. It demands liquid capital that a woman drowning in designer credit card debt simply does not possess. I look down at Brittany, who slowly lowers her hands from her face, her eyes wide with absolute unadulterated terror. She knows exactly what documents are currently hovering 50 feet in the air. I highlight the topmost PDF file and maximize it for the entire audience to inspect. These are uncollateralized corporate loan agreements. I explain, my voice ringing with lethal precision. They represent hundreds of thousands of dollars in unsecured cash transferred directly into the collapsed Cayman Islands syndicate. Securing this level of high-tier financing requires pristine credit, flawless financial history, and an impeccable professional reputation. It requires a level of financial stability that you, Brittany, have never achieved in your entire life. So the question is, how did you convince highly regulated lending institutions to hand you a mountain of cash to gamble away in an illegal offshore market? The answer is projected right behind me. The cathedral remains completely silent as the guests read the magnified application forms. The sheer audacity of her actions begins to dawn on the crowd. Brittany did not just participate in a devastating criminal conspiracy against my husband and me. She committed a deeply personal, financially ruinous crime against the one person who actually trusted her. I step away from the laptop and walk directly toward Andre, who is standing completely still, his eyes locked onto the giant screens. His rigid posture betrays the horrifying realization crashing down upon him. He is a senior financial auditor, a man whose entire existence relies on ethical compliance and regulatory transparency. He understands the profound severity of commercial loan fraud better than anyone else in this building. I watch the color drain completely from his face as he reads the specific details of the applications. The ultimate betrayal was never just about framing me. It was about who Brittany chose to sacrifice to buy her way into the scheme. I step aside, allowing Andre an unobstructed view of the catastrophic evidence. I type a rapid command, zooming in directly on the guarantor section of the massive loan documents. The screens display the information in glaring, undeniable detail. Right there, securing hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent debt, is Andre's full legal name. Positioned directly beneath his name is his highly guarded personal social security number. Next to that, bold and unmistakable, are his certified professional auditing license credentials. And sitting at the very bottom of the page, finalizing the illegal contract, is his exact digital signature. I turn back to Brittany, my voice dropping into a razor-sharp whisper that carries across the silent room. You did not just steal from a bank, Brittany. You committed federal identity theft. You hijacked your own husband's pristine professional reputation to guarantee illegal loans for a criminal syndicate. Andre stares at the 50-foot projection, his chest heaving as he struggles to process the absolute destruction of his livelihood. As a licensed auditor, his career is strictly governed by federal financial regulations. By using his professional credentials to underwrite a fraudulent offshore Ponzi scheme, Brittany did not merely ruin his credit score. She legally bound him to a massive federal crime. She placed him directly in the crosshairs of the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice. Because his digital signature and audit license were used to secure the funds, the authorities will automatically assume he was the primary architect of the financial fraud. She handed the federal government everything they need to strip him of his professional license, seize his personal assets, and throw him into a federal penitentiary. Brittany pushes herself up from the pew, her face streaked with mascara and tears. She reaches her trembling hands out toward Andre, her voice cracking into a desperate, pathetic whine. Andre. I can explain, she sobs, taking a frantic step toward him. I was going to pay it all back. The returns were supposed to be guaranteed. I just needed your signature to get the initial approval. I never meant to put your license at risk. You have to believe me, I did it for our future. The absolute delusion of her statement disgusts everyone in the room. She committed identity theft, defrauded a major financial institution, and actively participated in a plot to frame a Navy SEAL for treason, yet she still tries to manipulate her husband into believing she acted out of love. She used his unblemished record as collateral for her own insatiable greed, showing absolutely zero regard for his safety or his freedom. She viewed his hard-earned career as nothing more than a convenient tool to fund her arrogant lifestyle. The irrefutable proof of her extreme financial betrayal is burned onto the screens above us, finalizing her total and complete ruin. Andre stares at the massive projection screen suspended above the cathedral altar. His dark eyes trace the digital signature, the federal tax identification numbers, and his highly restricted professional auditing license code. He is a senior financial auditor who has built his entire career on absolute transparency, ethical compliance, and unshakable integrity. In a matter of seconds, his analytical mind calculates the exact federal statutes his wife just violated. He mentally lists the catastrophic charges she brought upon him: aggravated identity theft, commercial wire fraud conspiracy, to commit extortion, and actively participating in an illegal offshore financial syndicate. He knows the federal sentencing guidelines by heart. Brittany did not just ruin their credit score or jeopardize their mortgage. She manufactured a digital paper trail that positions him as the primary financial architect of a multi-million-dollar international Ponzi scheme. The horrifying reality of his situation crashes over him with the devastating force of a freight train. If I had not intercepted that USB drive and publicly decrypted the malicious files today, the relentless federal authorities would have traced those fraudulent commercial loan applications directly back to Andre without hesitation. The Securities and Exchange Commission would have looked at the pristine auditing credentials securely attached to the fraudulent loans and concluded instantly that Andre knowingly used his professional expertise to facilitate the massive crime. Armed tactical agents would have brutally raided his prestigious corporate office, paraded him out in heavy iron handcuffs right in front of his shocked colleagues, and permanently stripped him of the hard-earned license he spent 10 grueling years earning. He would have faced multiple decades locked inside a maximum security prison for a severe financial crime he knew absolutely nothing about. All because the arrogant woman he married blindly decided his personal freedom was a perfectly acceptable price to pay to continuously fund her wildly expensive superficial lifestyle. His breathing grows heavy, his broad chest rising and falling as the sheer calculated malice of her actions takes root in his mind. He looks away from the glaring red numbers on the screen and turns his gaze to Brittany. She is standing a few feet away, her hands clasped together in a pathetic gesture of begging. Her face is smeared with expensive makeup, her custom white cocktail dress, completely at odds with the federal crimes she just committed. Andre does not see his wife anymore. He sees a highly dangerous liability. He sees a predator who willingly used his name as a shield to protect her own greed. Brittany takes a desperate, shaky step toward him. She desperately reaches out her manicured fingers, grasping for the sleeve of his tailored suit jacket. "Andre, please say something to me," she cries, her desperate voice echoing shrilly in the silent room. "We can fix this. We can declare bankruptcy and start over. I will do whatever it takes to make it right. You are my husband. You promised to stand by me for better or for worse. You have to protect me." Andre recoils violently, stepping backward as if her physical touch is incredibly toxic. He jerks his arm out of her reach, his eyes blazing with an absolute uncompromising fury that makes her gasp. "Do not dare touch me," Andre commands, his voice dropping into a lethal, terrifying register that reverberates through the entire cathedral. "Do not dare quote sacred wedding vows to me after you committed identity theft and forged my signature to fund an illegal federal conspiracy. You did not make a simple financial mistake. You actively framed me for a felony to cover your own tracks. You put my professional license, my corporate career, and my personal freedom on the chopping block without a single second thought." He reaches into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulls out his cell phone. His movements are sharp, clinical, and completely devoid of any remaining affection. He unlocks the screen and dials a number, putting the phone on speaker for the entire room to hear. The line rings twice before a professional voicemail greeting plays, identifying the recipient as a senior partner at a prominent corporate law firm in Washington. The beep sounds echoing loudly across the marble floors. Andre speaks clearly and deliberately into the microphone, ensuring every single word is perfectly captured on the recording. "This is Andre. I need you to initiate immediate divorce proceedings against my wife, Brittany. I also need you to contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission immediately today. I am officially reporting her for aggravated identity theft, commercial wire fraud, and forgery. She has illegally used my professional auditing credentials to secure hundreds of thousands of dollars in uncollateralized loans for an offshore Ponzi scheme. I am turning over all my personal financial logs and devices to serve as state evidence against her. Call me the absolute second you get this message." He ends the call with a definitive click. Brittany lets out a guttural, devastated wail, her knees buckling as she collapses onto the cold stone floor. She reaches for him again, begging him to cancel the call, pleading that she will go to jail if he abandons her. Brenda rushes forward, screaming at Andre for betraying his family and abandoning his wife in her hour of need. Harrison stands completely paralyzed, realizing that their only remaining shield has just officially joined the prosecution. Andre looks down at Brittany, sobbing on the floor. He feels absolutely zero remaining pity. "You betrayed me the second you forged my name," he states coldly, turning his back on her entirely. "You are going to federal prison. Brittany and I am going to make absolutely certain I am the one who hands them the keys to your cell." He walks away, stepping entirely out of the blast radius of her impending destruction. The absolute finality of his departure leaves the golden child completely defenseless against the overwhelming federal forces closing in closely around her. The heavy wooden doors of the cathedral remain securely locked, serving as a brutal physical reminder that the illusion of my parents' control is officially and permanently shattered. Harrison stands paralyzed near the center aisle, his eyes darting frantically across the faces of the wedding guests. He finally processes the true identity of the people sitting quietly in the mahogany pews. These are not ordinary citizens who will simply look away from an uncomfortable family dispute. These are high-ranking intelligence directors, decorated military commanders, and federal prosecutors who have spent their entire careers dismantling criminal syndicates. Several of the guests are already tapping rapidly on their secured government-issued cell phones, undoubtedly communicating with their respective agencies to report the severe security breach unfolding right in front of them. The absolute weight of their catastrophic failure crashes down upon my biological family. They marched into this venue expecting to find an easy target, a vulnerable woman they could easily manipulate into signing away her multi-million-dollar enterprise. Instead, they walked blindly into a highly fortified stronghold and handed a signed confession directly to the authorities. Brenda stares up at the massive projection screens, the glowing red numbers of their massive financial debt reflecting in her terrified eyes. The carefully constructed facade she maintained for decades is entirely annihilated. She can no longer hide behind her expensive designer clothes or her arrogant suburban country club persona. Everyone in this room knows she is a desperate broke criminal who attempted to frame an innocent naval officer for treason. The crushing reality of her impending federal prison sentence violently rips the remaining arrogance right out of her chest. Harrison slowly lowers his head, the remaining color completely draining from his face, as he realizes that his business, his freedom, and his entire legacy are utterly destroyed. He cannot bully his way out of a federal espionage investigation. He cannot scream at heavily armed Navy SEALs to let him leave. He is entirely powerless, reduced to nothing more than a cornered suspect waiting for the authorities to arrive and haul him away in iron chains. Brittany remains collapsed on the cold stone floor, whimpering pathetically as she watches her husband walk away forever. She realizes that her identity theft did not just cost her her marriage, but guaranteed her a spot in a maximum security facility. The golden child who was always handed everything on a silver platter is finally facing the brutal, uncompromising consequences of her own malicious actions. The massive power shift in the room is absolute and undeniable. I stand firm beside Declan, perfectly calm, watching the predators instantly transform into terrified, helpless prey. They realize simultaneously that they cannot fight their way out of this trap. Their only remaining option is to beg the very person they came here to destroy. The suffocating silence of the cathedral is abruptly broken by a loud, guttural sob. Brenda suddenly drops heavily to her knees, the harsh impact echoing across the polished marble floor. She abandons every single ounce of her precious dignity and begins crawling frantically across the stone, dragging herself directly toward the spot where I stand. Her designer dress bunches around her thighs, her perfectly styled hair falling wildly across her tear-streaked face. She reaches out with trembling hands, her fingers desperately grabbing the delicate silk hem of my custom wedding gown. She looks up at me, her eyes wide with a manufactured theatrical terror instantly shifting into the ultimate manipulation tactic. "Rebecca, please." My mother wails, her voice echoing shrilly against the vaulted ceilings. "You have to stop this. You cannot let them take us away. We are your family. We are your own flesh and blood. You cannot send your own mother and father to a federal prison." She clutches the fabric of my dress tighter, burying her face into the silk as she unleashes a torrent of hysterical, pleading apologies. She plays the ultimate victim card, attempting to leverage the very biological ties she discarded 15 years ago. We were driven entirely mad by the desperation she cries, her voice shaking violently. "You do not understand the blinding panic of losing absolutely everything. The investors were threatening us. The bank was taking the house. We were completely terrified. We never actually wanted to hurt you or Declan. We just needed the money to save the family. You have to understand that blood is thicker than water. You have to forgive us and let us go." Harrison drops to his knees right beside her, the arrogant patriarch fully surrendering to his overwhelming fear. He reaches out, pleading with me to show mercy. "Rebecca, please listen to your mother," he begs, his voice cracking pitifully. "We made a horrible, catastrophic mistake. We were out of our minds with financial panic. But you have your entire life ahead of you. You have your successful company and your strong husband. You have won everything. Please just unlock the doors and let us walk away. We will leave the state. We will never bother you again. I swear it on my life. Just do not call the police. Give your family one final chance. Brittany crawls over to join them, forming a pathetic cluster of weeping criminals at my feet. She begs me to consider her future, crying about how she cannot survive behind bars. They throw every emotional weapon they have left at my feet, sobbing about shared childhoods, biological obligations, and the sacred bond of family. They desperately hope that the frightened, discarded 18-year-old girl still exists somewhere deep inside my heart. They pray that my basic human decency will override my desire for absolute justice. They expect me to crack under the heavy pressure of a public family breakdown and quietly open the exit doors to sweep their federal crimes completely under the rug. They truly believe that my capacity for forgiveness is an exploitable weakness they can use to escape the monumental devastation they actively engineered. Their groveling is nothing more than a final desperate scam to avoid the absolute ruin closing in on them. I slowly look down at the three pathetic figures sobbing on the cold marble floor at my feet. Brenda continues to clutch the silk fabric of my wedding gown, her tears staining the pristine white material as she babbles endlessly about family forgiveness and second chances. Harrison remains on his knees, his broad shoulders shaking as the reality of his impending federal indictment crushes the last remaining ounces of his pride. Brittany cowers beside them, a broken, terrified shadow of the golden child who once twirled the keys to a luxury vehicle while watching me freeze on our childhood porch. They fully expect me to break. They expect the ingrained societal pressure of honoring thy father and mother to override my basic survival instincts. They desperately hope that the frightened, weak 18-year-old girl they discarded like trash will suddenly resurface to shield them from the catastrophic consequences of their own malicious actions. I will never let them drag me back into their twisted, toxic narrative ever again. They hold zero power over me today. I do not flinch. I do not offer a single tear of sympathy. I do not scream or lose my composure. The blinding anger that surged through my veins when I first saw the military-grade tracking device has completely evaporated, leaving behind a profound, impenetrable emotional void. I feel absolutely nothing for the people groveling before me. I reach down and firmly grasp my mother's trembling wrists. With slow, deliberate precision, I pry her manicured fingers off my wedding dress one by one. She looks up at me, her eyes wide with desperate confusion, as I physically sever her connection to me. I take a very deliberate step backward, removing myself entirely from their grasping reach. I stand tall beside my husband, aligning my posture with Declan's rigid, unyielding military stance. The contrast between my absolute calm and their hysterical panic is stark and undeniable. 15 years ago, I was the one crying on the ground, begging for a shred of mercy from parents who had just stolen my entire college savings. They did not blink when they threw me into the dark, indifferent night. Now at 33 years old, standing in a cathedral, surrounded by highly trained federal operators, they expect me to grant them the exact grace they aggressively denied me. They did not just insult me today. They actively attempted to frame a decorated naval special warfare commander for international espionage. They built a digital guillotine designed to execute us both, and they only started crying when the blade swung back to sever their own necks. I look at their tear-streaked faces and realize they are completely incapable of genuine remorse. They are only sorry that their flawless extortion plot was intercepted by a superior force. Their groveling is a tactical retreat, a last-ditch effort to manipulate my empathy, hoping I will act like a compliant victim. I refuse to give them a single inch of ground. My boundary is an absolute fortress of iron, and they are permanently locked on the outside. I reach over to the podium and pick up the wireless microphone we intended to use for our wedding vows. The sleek metal feels cool and solid in my grip. I turn the device on, the slight feedback echoing sharply through the cavernous space of the cathedral, immediately commanding the absolute attention of every single person in the room. The murmuring from the elite guests ceases entirely. The active duty SEALs guarding the exits stand perfectly still. Even the frantic sobbing of my parents and my sister tapers off into fearful, ragged gasps as they look up at me waiting for my final verdict. I look directly down into the terrified eyes of the people who gave me life, my voice ringing with a cold, devastating clarity that leaves absolutely no room for negotiation or debate. You stopped being my family the day you stole my future to buy a car. The words strike them like physical blows echoing over the high-end audio system for the entire assembly of intelligence officers and defense contractors to hear. You became my enemy the second you threatened my husband. Blood does not buy you a pardon for treason. Harrison opens his mouth to offer another pathetic excuse, but the sheer force of my glare silences him instantly. You marched into a secure facility today, intending to destroy an innocent man just to cover your own disgusting financial crimes. I continue my tone unrelenting and razor sharp. You viewed Declan's military career and my corporate success as nothing more than a convenient bank account you could hijack to pay off a collapsed offshore Ponzi scheme. You banked on my trauma. You tried to weaponize my love for my husband to extort millions of dollars from my company. You are not my parents. You are domestic terrorists who attempted to execute a catastrophic federal frame-up. Brenda shakes her head violently, burying her face against the cold marble floor, as the reality of my absolute rejection washes over her. You ask me for mercy, I state smoothly, my voice echoing above her weeping. You beg me to unlock those doors and let you walk away. But mercy is reserved for people who make honest mistakes. You made a highly calculated, heavily funded, and deeply malicious choice to annihilate us. You bought restricted surveillance hardware. You hired black market hackers. You forged classified naval intelligence documents. You crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. I lower the microphone, locking onto the heavy oak doors at the back of the venue. I will never forgive you, and I will absolutely not save you. I am handing you over to the justice system you tried to use against us. The bridge between us is burned to ash, and you struck the match. You will face the massive federal government completely and entirely alone today, and always from now on permanently. The moment my final word hangs in the cathedral air, a piercing wail cuts through the tense silence. It starts as a distant shriek, echoing through the busy streets of Washington, then rapidly multiplies into a deafening chorus of heavy sirens approaching the venue. Red and blue lights begin flashing wildly through the towering stained glass windows, casting fractured, chaotic colors across the terrified faces of my biological family. Harrison gasps, his eyes darting frantically toward the locked oak doors as the reality of those sirens violently crushes his last remaining hope of escape. He realizes instantly that this is not a bluff. The authorities are already here. Declan had not simply ordered his men to secure the physical perimeter of the church to prevent my family from leaving. The absolute second Liam confirmed the presence of an active transmitting device and military-grade tracking hardware, Declan's squad initiated a silent top-tier distress protocol. As an active-duty naval special warfare commander, holding a maximum security clearance, any unauthorized surveillance equipment brought into his immediate vicinity automatically triggers a catastrophic federal response. His men utilized secure encrypted comms to immediately contact the Naval Criminal Investigative Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, alerting them to an active counterintelligence threat targeting a senior military official. The response time was brutal and absolute. The tactical units did not waste a single second requesting local police assistance. They scrambled rapid deployment federal task forces directly to our location. The wailing sirens outside grow deafening, signaling the arrival of dozens of armored vehicles surrounding the cathedral perimeter. Brenda clamps her hands over her ears, curling into a tight ball on the marble floor as the overwhelming noise shatters her remaining sanity. Brittany presses her back against the nearest pew, her entire body shaking violently as she stares at the flashing lights illuminating the grand hall. They thought they had plenty of time to execute their extortion plot and negotiate a massive payout. They failed to understand that the United States government does not negotiate with domestic threats targeting their elite military commanders. The heavy thud of tactical boots echoes on the stone steps outside the main entrance. My parents freeze, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the federal force they summoned with their own unbridled greed. The sirens abruptly cut off, replaced by the terrifying, aggressive sound of heavy breaching equipment slamming loudly against the barricaded doors. The tactical response units do not care that this is a beautiful wedding venue. They only care that a commanding officer has been targeted by hostile surveillance. The illusion of family privacy is entirely dead. The absolute wrath of the federal justice system is standing right on the other side of that thick wood, fully prepared to aggressively tear down the massive doors, to neutralize the active threat hiding inside the grand hall immediately. Harrison attempts to stand, but his legs buckle beneath the crushing, absolute panic overtaking him completely right now today. This ends. Declan gives a sharp nod to the operative stationed by the entrance. The seal swiftly disengages the heavy iron deadbolts and swings the massive oak doors wide open. A highly coordinated flood of federal agents pours into the cathedral. They are clad in dark tactical gear, heavily armed, and moving with absolute terrifying efficiency. FBI and NCIS operatives instantly fan out, securing every possible exit and isolating my biological family from the rest of the wedding guests. Harrison screams out in absolute terror as two heavily armored agents grab his shoulders, forcing him flat against the polished marble floor. Harrison attempts to squirm out of the tight grip of the armed agent, but he is swiftly shoved back down against the cold stone. Brenda wails hysterically, flailing her arms, but an incredibly stern female agent swiftly pins her wrists behind her back. Brenda ceases her wailing, her voice completely giving out as the shiny metal handcuffs are forcefully secured tightly around her wrists. Brittany remains frozen against the wooden pew, hyperventilating violently as a federal investigator loudly demands she step away from the isolated table. Declan walks smoothly down the center aisle, bypassing my panicking family without a single downward glance. He approaches the lead NCIS agent, a tall, imposing man who immediately recognizes my husband's senior rank. Declan does not waste time on emotional exposition. He operates with strict, lethal military precision. He gestures directly toward the open silver gift box sitting on the table nearby. We have a confirmed active counterintelligence threat delivered directly to my physical location. Declan reports, his voice ringing with absolute authority. The subjects utilized a disguised package to introduce an actively transmitting burner phone and a military-grade micro-GPS tracking beacon into this secured gathering. The agent's eyes narrow sharply as he assesses the blinking hardware, immediately understanding the catastrophic severity of the breach. Declan then hands over the printed forensic logs I extracted during the live hack. He details the specific nature of the malicious payload hidden within the encrypted flash drive. The suspects paid black market operatives to fabricate highly classified naval communications designed to implicate me in international espionage. Declan continues outlining the flawless extortion plot. They simultaneously forged corporate financial ledgers to frame my wife's cybersecurity firm for massive offshore money laundering. The intent was to trigger a federal raid, secure my arrest for treason, and violently extort my wife's corporate assets to cover their collapsed Ponzi scheme debt. The lead agent reviews the digital forensics, his expression hardening into a mask of pure disgust. The undeniable, meticulously crafted evidence leaves absolutely zero room for plausible deniability. The federal investigators now possess exactly what they need to lock my toxic family away for decades. My husband officially transferred the destruction of my abusers over to the United States government. The trap has snapped completely shut, finalizing their ultimate ruin. The undeniable consequences have finally arrived today. They will never escape this fate. It is over for them entirely. It is over for them entirely. The lead federal agent signals to his team, and the tactical operatives move with swift, unyielding precision. They haul Harrison up from the cold marble floor, his expensive suit now rumpled and stained with the sweat of his own panicked exertion. He tries to squirm, muttering hollow threats about suing the government and destroying their careers, but a heavy hand on his shoulder forces him into rigid compliance. Brenda is yanked upright next, her perfectly styled hair completely ruined her expensive makeup, running in dark, ugly streaks down her pale cheeks. The agent steps directly behind her, grabbing her arms with absolute authority. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut echoes loudly across the silent cathedral. It is a deeply satisfying sound. Those are the exact same hands that forcefully shoved me out of my childhood home into the freezing night 15 years ago. Now they are permanently bound by federal steel. Brittany is the last to be pulled from the wooden pew. She thrashes weakly, crying out for someone to save her, but the elite crowd remains absolutely motionless. The agent twists her arms behind her back. The handcuffs click tightly over the very same wrists that just 20 minutes ago confidently shoved the malicious silver gift box into my hands. The arrogant smirk she wore when she attempted to destroy my wedding has been entirely replaced by a distorted mask of absolute terror. "You have the right to remain silent," the lead agent announces, his booming voice cutting through the stifling air of the grand venue. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The Miranda warning rings out like a final, devastating death knell for my biological family. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. The sheer irony of that statement hangs heavily over the room. They had desperately plotted to steal my multi-million-dollar cybersecurity firm just to pay off their illegal Ponzi scheme debt, and now they will have to rely on overworked public defenders to fight their federal espionage and wire fraud charges. The federal agents do not offer them any dignity or discretion. They grab Harrison, Brenda, and Brittany by their arms and physically drag them straight down the center aisle of the cathedral. They are forcefully paraded right past the decorated military commanders, the elite intelligence analysts, and the powerful defense contractors they so desperately wanted to impress. The high society guests watch with expressions of pure, unadulterated disgust. Brenda wails hysterically as she is pulled toward the exit, tripping over her expensive heels. Harrison keeps his head bowed, thoroughly crushed by the public humiliation of his spectacular downfall. The golden child, who was given every single advantage funded by my stolen college savings, is hauled away like a common street criminal. The heavy oak doors swing open, and they are shoved out into the blinding flashes of police cruiser lights, permanently banished from my life and my world. As the massive wooden doors slam shut behind the disgraced criminals, the stifling tension in the cathedral finally begins to dissipate. The air feels remarkably cleaner without their toxic presence polluting my wedding day. I turn away from the entrance and find Andre standing near the front pew. My brother-in-law has watched his entire marriage disintegrate over the last hour, discovering that the woman he pledged his life to had maliciously used his pristine professional credentials to commit massive commercial loan fraud. Yet despite the catastrophic revelation of his wife's profound betrayal, Andre does not look broken. He stands tall, his posture reflecting the unshakable integrity that defines his character. Andre walks purposefully toward the altar, bypassing the remaining federal investigators securing the isolated table. He stops directly in front of me. He does not offer a hollow apology for his wife's actions, because he knows he bears absolutely no responsibility for her criminal greed. Instead, he extends his right hand. I reach out and accept the gesture. His handshake is firm, respectful, and deeply grounding. "You built an incredible life, Rebecca," Andre says, his voice steady and commanding. "You survived their cruelty and created a massive empire from absolutely nothing. I always wondered why they spoke of you with such bitter, enduring resentment. Now I know the truth. They were absolutely terrified of your unwavering strength because it brilliantly highlighted their own pathetic weakness." I nod, deeply appreciating the profound validation from a man who just lost everything he thought he knew about his own family. Andre releases my hand and turns deliberately toward the lead FBI agent, who is currently cataloging the malicious hardware extracted from the silver box. Andre squares his shoulders, presenting himself with absolute professional authority. Agent Andre states clearly, ensuring his words carry across the quiet room. I am a licensed senior financial auditor. The woman you just arrested for identity theft and conspiracy used my personal social security number and my professional licensing credentials to fraudulently underwrite hundreds of thousands of dollars in commercial loans. I had absolutely zero knowledge of her involvement in any offshore financial syndicates or illegal Ponzi schemes. The lead agent looks up from his evidence bags, his sharp eyes assessing Andre's calm, highly cooperative demeanor. I am officially surrendering all of my personal and corporate audit logs, my encrypted hard drives, and my communication records to your department immediately. Andre continues without a single ounce of hesitation. I am turning over everything I possess to serve as state evidence against Brittany Harrison and Brenda. I will testify in federal court, and I will assist your forensic accounting team in tracking every single dollar they attempted to hide. I will help you bury them. Harry. The federal agent nods approvingly, recognizing a highly valuable asset when he sees one. We appreciate your full cooperation, sir. My team will be in touch to secure those files. Andre nods once. He turns back to look at Declan and me, offering a final respectful bow of his head. He does not look back at the doors where his wife was just dragged away in chains. He turns around and walks straight down the center aisle. He moves with measured, confident strides, his head held incredibly high. He embraces his reclaimed independence, an untarnished professional honor. He is a man whose conscience is completely clear, stepping proudly out of the wreckage of a highly toxic marriage and leaving the malicious criminals entirely to their inevitable, devastating fate. The heavy oak doors of the cathedral remain open just long enough for me to watch the flashing red and blue lights of the federal transport vehicles reflect brightly off the wet pavement outside. The massive caravans of armored government SUVs and local police cruisers finally shift into drive. They pull away from the curb, aggressively carrying the toxic weight of my entire past away forever. The flashing lights slowly fade into the distant Washington traffic, dissolving until they are nothing more than a bad memory being swallowed by the busy city streets. The federal operative stationed at the entrance grabs the brass handles and pushes the massive cathedral doors shut. The heavy iron latch engages with a solid, resounding thud that echoes powerfully through the vaulted space. That singular sound officially seals the perimeter, locking the darkness outside and securing the profound peace inside the grand venue. The suffocating adrenaline that fueled my entire confrontation suddenly evaporates from my bloodstream. I stand alone at the base of the altar, staring blankly at the empty marble space where my biological family just groveled and begged for mercy. My hands, which were flying across my encrypted keyboard with lethal precision just moments ago, finally begin to tremble slightly. The sheer magnitude of what just transpired crashes over me like a massive tidal wave. I just sent my parents and my sister to federal prison. I just dismantled an international espionage frame up on my actual wedding day. Declan does not hesitate for a single second. He recognizes the exact moment the tactical adrenaline leaves my body and the emotional weight attempts to settle in. He closes the short distance between us rapidly and wraps his strong, muscular arms completely around my waist. He pulls me flush against his chest, burying his face in the crook of my neck. His embrace is absolute, serving as an unyielding anchor in the sudden emotional void. I rest my forehead against his broad shoulder, closing my eyes tightly, and breathing in his familiar comforting scent of cedar and sea salt. The rigid defensive posture I maintained for the last intense hour entirely crumbles. I let out a long, shaky breath, feeling the heavy toxic tension physically drain from my shoulders, flowing out of my body and disappearing into the floor. The biting chill of the marble beneath my feet is entirely replaced by the overwhelming radiant warmth of my husband holding me close. I am completely safe. The threat is fully neutralized. Declan holds me fiercely, silently communicating that he will forever stand as the impenetrable wall between me and anyone who dares to wish me harm. We stand together in the center of the grand cathedral, finding absolute stillness and profound security in the immediate aftermath of the storm. Declan eventually pulls back just enough to look directly into my eyes. He raises his hand gently, brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. His gaze is filled with overwhelming pride and undeniable love. He does not see a victim of familial abuse. He sees a victorious survivor who just brutally executed a flawless defense of her empire. Declan turns his head slightly and catches the eye of the string quartet leader stationed near the choir loft. He gives a sharp, decisive nod to the musicians. They immediately lift their instruments, sliding their bows across the strings. The bright, joyous melody of a triumphant classical piece fills the cavernous space, instantly washing away the lingering hostility of the federal raid. The beautiful music acts as a powerful, undeniable signal that the battle is over and the victory is entirely ours. The wedding guests, who have remained seated in stunned, captivated silence for the past hour, suddenly rise to their feet. It starts with the four-star general seated in the second row. He stands incredibly tall and begins to clap his hands, striking together with profound, hard-earned respect. The defense contractors quickly follow suit. Then the intelligence analysts, and finally, every single guest in the magnificent venue is standing. The polite applause rapidly escalates into a thunderous, overwhelming roar of absolute approval. They are not clapping out of pity or awkward politeness. They are giving me a massive standing ovation for the sheer, unapologetic strength I displayed while dismantling a catastrophic threat. They witnessed a woman expertly protect her husband, her company, and her country without shedding a single tear or showing an ounce of weakness. I look out over the sea of cheering faces, feeling a sudden immense surge of genuine joy radiating through my chest. I see my brilliant cybersecurity team, the dedicated analysts who stayed late to help me build my firm from the ground up when I had nothing. I see Declan's loyal squad mates, the fierce warriors who instantly formed a physical shield around me the second danger entered the room today. I see the mentors, the allies, and the brilliant friends who actively supported my rise from a broke, discarded teenager to a wealthy, influential chief executive officer. The realization hits me with beautiful, crystal-clear clarity. The people standing in this room right now are my actual family. Blood is merely a biological coincidence, but true loyalty is a conscious, continuous choice. My biological parents and sister chose greed, betrayal, and extreme malice. The people cheering for me today chose respect, fierce protection, and unconditional love. I squeezed Declan's hand tightly, raising my chin and beaming brightly at the magnificent crowd. The toxic shadows of my past are officially locked behind federal bars, leaving me to bask completely in the radiant, brilliant light of the spectacular future I built for myself. 18 months pass with the swift, unrelenting efficiency of the federal justice system. The grand cathedral where my wedding was interrupted feels like a distant memory as I sit in the polished wooden gallery of a United States District Court in Washington. I hold Declan's hand, watching the final brutal chapter of my biological family's existence come to a definitive close. Harrison, Brenda, and Brittany are not wearing designer suits or expensive cocktail dresses today. They are dressed in identical, shapeless khaki jumpsuits, their wrists heavily shackled to thick chain belts locked around their waists. The arrogant defiance they carried their entire lives has been erased, replaced by the hollow, sunken features of individuals who spent the last year rotting in maximum security holding cells. The federal judge presiding over the case shows absolutely zero leniency. He reads the charges aloud, his voice echoing with absolute finality. For conspiracy to commit extortion, international wire fraud, and attempting to compromise a military officer with top-secret clearance, Harrison and Brenda are handed 25-year sentences without the possibility of early parole. Given their advanced age, it is a guaranteed life sentence. They will take their final breaths behind reinforced steel bars. Brittany receives an even harsher penalty. Because Andre meticulously documented her severe financial crimes and testified brilliantly as the primary witness for the prosecution, she is convicted of aggravated identity theft, on top of the extortion charges. The judge sentences her to 30 years in federal prison. When the heavy wooden gavel slams down, finalizing their destruction, my mother lets out a pathetic, broken wail, that echoes uselessly against the courtroom walls. My father slumps forward, utterly defeated. Brittany hyperventilates, completely collapsing against the defense table, as armed bailiffs aggressively drag them out of the courtroom forever. They look back at me one last time, their eyes silently begging for a rescue that will never come. I look back at them with absolute unshakable indifference. Andre is sitting 2 rows ahead of me. He turns and offers a respectful, satisfied nod. By actively collaborating with the FBI and handing over his personal audit logs immediately, he completely cleared his name. He successfully finalized his divorce, retained his prestigious professional auditing license, and recently accepted a massive promotion at a rival financial firm. He walked through the fire and emerged entirely victorious, untainted by the criminal greed of his former wife. As for my own empire, the thwarted espionage plot actually served as the ultimate catalyst for unprecedented growth. The high-ranking military officials who witnessed my ruthless, efficient dismantling of a digital threat at my wedding recognized my supreme capability. My cybersecurity firm recently secured a massive exclusive 10-year contract directly with the Department of Defense. We are now the primary architects shielding the most critical infrastructure in the nation. My business skyrocketed to unprecedented heights, generating wealth and influence my toxic parents could never have calculated. More importantly, my marriage to Declan thrives built on an unshakable foundation of absolute trust and fierce protection. Our home is a fortress of peace entirely free from the manipulation and cruel expectations I endured during my childhood. Standing on the expansive balcony of my new home, I look out at the crashing waves and reflect on the profound journey that brought me here. Society constantly pushes a deeply flawed narrative about biological loyalty. We are conditioned from a young age to believe that blood ties demand infinite forgiveness, that we must endlessly tolerate abuse, simply because we share DNA with our abusers. We are told to keep the peace, to turn the other cheek, and to constantly shrink ourselves to fit inside a toxic family dynamic. I am the living, breathing proof that this narrative is a complete and utter lie. True strength is not found in silently enduring abuse in the name of family loyalty. True strength is recognizing your own inherent value and refusing to let anyone, regardless of their biological relation to you, treat you like collateral damage. It is understanding that you do not owe your success, your peace, or your sanity to the people who actively tried to destroy you. It is having the absolute courage to burn the bridge completely when you realize the people standing on the other side are the exact ones holding the matches. The night my parents threw me onto that freezing porch with a garbage bag of clothes, they thought they were handing me a death sentence. They genuinely believed that without their financial support and their arrogant guidance, I would crumble into a pathetic, helpless failure. They severely underestimated the raw, unrelenting power of a woman who has absolutely nothing left to lose. I took the jagged, broken pieces of the life they shattered and forged them into an impenetrable suit of armor. I built an empire with my own 2 hands, and when they finally came back to steal the crown I rightfully earned, I used the very skills I developed in my exile to execute their absolute destruction. You are never obligated to set yourself on fire simply to keep toxic people warm. If you are watching this right now and you are currently trapped in a cycle of familial abuse, please listen to me carefully. You have the power to walk away. You have the ability to build a spectacular life entirely independent of the people who constantly belittle your ambitions. Do not let their cruel projections define your reality. Cut the dead weight, secure your boundaries, and completely refuse to apologize for fiercely protecting your own happiness. Taking control of your destiny requires brutal, unapologetic decisions, but the profound peace waiting on the other side is worth every single difficult step. I survived the absolute worst they could throw at me, and I emerged completely victorious. I am no longer the discarded scapegoat. I am a highly successful, deeply loved, and fiercely protected woman. Stepping into the brilliant, undeniable light means leaving the darkness exactly where it belongs, permanently locked behind federal bars. The story of Rebecca and her family serves as a powerful testament to a harsh but liberating truth: biology does not automatically entitle anyone to your loyalty, your resources, or your peace. For far too long, societal expectations have perpetuated the dangerous narrative that we must endlessly forgive and accommodate our toxic blood relatives simply because they are our family. However, the ultimate lesson embedded in this narrative is that true strength is not found in silent endurance or unconditional compliance. Rather, it is found in the courage to establish impenetrable boundaries. When Rebecca was discarded at her most vulnerable, she did not allow her parents' betrayal to define her worth. Instead, she channeled that profound rejection into building an empire of her own making, completely independent of their toxic influence. Her journey teaches us that when the people who are supposed to protect you become the very ones holding the matches to burn your life down, the healthiest response is to let them go. We are never obligated to set ourselves on fire to keep our abusers warm, no matter how much they try to weaponize the concept of familial duty to manipulate us. Furthermore, this narrative completely redefines the true meaning of family. It proves that an authentic family is constructed through mutual respect, fierce protection, and absolute support qualities, demonstrated brilliantly by Declan and Rebecca's chosen circle rather than her biological relatives. By refusing to grant her abusers unearned mercy, Rebecca reclaimed her power and protected her hard-earned sanctuary. This story is a brilliant reminder that walking away from toxicity is never an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. If you are currently trapped in a cycle of familial manipulation, find the courage to cut the dead weight and fiercely protect your own happiness today.